Good evening and a warm welcome to the Harvard Art Museums. I'm Martha Tedeschi, Elizabeth and John Moore's Cabot Director of the Harvard Art Museums. Normally, we would begin the evening with a first welcome from Harvard students who would ask you to silence your cell phones. So I'm going to do that in their stead. Please silence your cell phones. But our students currently are underground, studying for final exams as the academic year comes to a close. So I am here, minus the students, to welcome you to the 16th annual Ilse and Leo Mildenberg Memorial Lecture. Tonight, we are delighted to welcome as our speaker, Alan Stahl, who comes to us from Princeton University as curator of numismatics and lecturer in the departments of art and archaeology, classics, and history. We're thrilled to welcome Dr. Stahl and to acknowledge our partnership for this event, which is co-sponsored by the Standing Committee on Medieval Studies in conjunction with the 2018 Harvard Medieval Culture Workshop. The Mildenberg Lecture started in 2003 and has continued to grow into a cherished yearly numismatic event in Cambridge. Leo Mildenberg was an eminent scholar and dealer with a fascinating career which included teaching in Estonia, serving as the head of the numismatic department of Bank Loy, and visiting Harvard University regularly as a lecturer. Let us take a moment to share our gratitude for this event. I would like to thank those who started the Mildenberg Lecture Fund: Pat Earhart Modahede, coin room keeper and Mildenberg student; Faith Sandstrom, another friend and student of Leo's; and David Mitten, Emeritus Huntsman Curator of Ancient Art and Loeb Professor of Classics, as well as the Mildenberg Family Committee representative, Tina Rizak. I'm pleased to say that all are with us tonight. As well, we are excited to have so many coin enthusiasts and specialists in the audience, including members of the Society Historia Numorum. It is the strong community that has spurred and continues to support the study of coins and the building of a world-class coin collection at Harvard. And now, I would like to introduce a colleague who has stewarded this growth with great commitment. Please welcome the Harvard Art Museum's Damarete, curator of ancient coins, and the very first Mildenberg lecturer speaker, Carmen Arnold Biocchi, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Carmen, please join me at the podium. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martha. And it is a great honor to have the director assist come to the Mildenberg lecture, because obviously she has a lot of other obligations, and I'm grateful because it shows her support for the work I am trying to do here for the coin collection. So she has already thanked all our old friends, and I will be as brief as possible so you can listen to our speaker of tonight. Can you hear me? Yes, the microphone is on. So I have the great honor and a great pleasure of introducing tonight's speakers: the distinguished medievalist Alan Stahl, curator of numismatics at the Princeton Firestone Library, and he's also a lecturer in the Department of Art and Archaeology, Classics, and History at Princeton. Previously, he was curator of medieval coins and medals at the American Numismatic Society for almost 20 years, from 1980 to 2000. Dr. Stahl received a BA from the University of California at Berkeley in 1968, his MA and PhD in history at the University of Pennsylvania in 1973 and 1977. He taught as visiting professor at Rutgers, Michigan, Rice University, and at the Università di Venezia. Alan has published widely on a variety of subjects, from Merovingian coinage, that was his dissertation, to medals, American coins, and paper money. His major work, however, and continuing area of research is Venice. His book, Zecca, The Mint of Venice in the Middle Ages, published by Johns Hopkins University Press in 2000, received the award from the Association of American Publishers Professional Scholarly Publishing Award in Economics in 2001. Numerous grants from the Gladys Del Mas Foundation supported the research in the archives of Venice. As we learned at the lecture that Professor Stahl gave in Medieval Studies workshop in March, when our lecture had to be canceled or postponed because of the weather, he continued to work on the Mint of Venice and found some new documents. So stay tuned for more on Venice, which is his real love. You also like to go to the city and enjoy it. He received numerous awards, and I will mention only two of the most prestigious. The Eugene S. Ferguson Prize of the Society of the History of Technology in 2009 for the book of Michael of Rhodes, and he also received the Medal of the Royal Numismatic Society in 2010, which is one of the highest honors in numismatics. Alan is also a great teacher. He had trained and mentored many students at the American Numismatic Society's graduate seminar and at the university where he taught. Several of them now hold important positions in coin cabinets and universities. And I can attest to that myself, because he taught me a lot about economic history through his lectures at the American Numismatic Society, where we actually worked together for almost 20 years. So please join me in welcoming warmly Alan Stahl, who will talk to us about numismatic archaeology, interpreting coin finds from excavation context. Alan? Do you want this microphone? No. Then I'll turn it off.
This one. Okay? You can hear me? Thank you, Carmen, for the invitation, and thank you all for coming this evening. As Carmen said, I'm a medievalist, which puts me a little bit outside the mainstream of numismatics, but it's sometimes good to be a little outside the mainstream of a field. I had my first field exposure to archaeological numismatics at what is clearly the last conceivable numismatic site, last conceivable medieval archaeological site in the world, that founded by Christopher Columbus on the island of Hispaniola, now Dominican Republic, in 1494, the settlement of Isabella, that lasted barely to 1500. So it does qualify as medieval, even if it is New World, and all the coins found there were medieval. We get a little picture of what his settlement should have been like, or may have been like, from this National Geographic drawing, conjectural. The basic story is, as I'm sure you know, in 1492, the three ships went to the New World, and the Santa Maria foundered off the north coast of the island and left its crew there. Columbus came back on his second voyage. He actually made 7. We never hear about the other 6. And when he got to the site, they were all dead, or at least disappeared, presumed dead, and we don't really know exactly what happened, but we assume they got into some sort of altercations with the locals. So in any case, Columbus thought this was not a good site. to make a more permanent settlement. So he moved along the coast from what is now Haiti to what is now Dominican Republic and founded this settlement, which he called La Isabella. At the very end of 1494, he made a couple trips back to La Isabella with more crew. He had about 100 men on the second voyage with him, more crew and more goods, and apparently more coins. But it turned out not to be a terribly good site either. From a living point of view, there was no water supply nearby, but probably more important to Columbus, there was no gold to be found nearby, despite all the rumors. So on his fourth voyage, he founded a new settlement at the south of the island, Santo Domingo, and made that the capital of the New World, of New Spain. And we don't actually know how Isabella came to an end, but we conjecture that by 1500 it was abandoned, probably because of a combination of illness and warring with the locals. We all know how America brought diseases to the New World, but of course we didn't have antibodies against New World diseases. So it was actually a very sad place that we know about mainly from the court trials back in Spain, where Columbus was and his leaders were accused of all sorts of things, but they do go into the daily life in some detail. I am not going to do that, but I am going to go into a little bit of detail on the coins because I think it's an interesting site, very different from most medieval sites because we start knowing the dates, and from there we can interpret the coins, whereas usually when we approach an archaeological site, we use the coins to tell us what the dates are. Here we have the scatter of coins as of the 1992 season I was there, and that's pretty much the end. And we can see, let's see, let me just get this going. This is what we call the public part of the site with the alhóndiga, which is basically the warehouse, the church, and a fortified area, the castle, with this area in between, which no one quite knew what it was for, called the solar. And then here's the pueblo, where the people lived, and it seems to have been a mix of both Spaniards and some local people who came to live with the Spaniards. And the first thing is it's an amazing number of coins, especially for a medieval site. And that has to be due to the fact that it was such a disaster. That is, it was occupied for 5 years and there are over 100 coins found. It must be that people just abandoned it. Also, probably because the coins turned out not to be useful for much in that context, because you couldn't get much from the Indians showing them a Spanish coin. Another particular thing we found was these concentrations of coins, which we interpret tentatively as indicating a marketplace. We didn't know what the central thing is, but just the fact that so many coins were lost there tends to make us think it had a commercial use. Here are the two nice coins found there. A nice big silver coin of Henry IV, who is Isabella's father, and then one coin of Ferdinand and Isabella found, wouldn't you know, on the last day of excavation. It's a rule of archaeology that you always find the most interesting thing your last day, and then you don't really have time to look around and see what was next to it. But that's what happened. However, that's not typical. Most of the coins look like this. They are mainly billin, which is a term we use for any coin that's a silver, copper, alloy that's more copper than silver. And these are a lot more copper than silver, as you can probably tell. They may be 10% silver. But in the Middle Ages, in medieval Europe at least, nobody made coins of pure copper. We'll see later when we start looking at Byzantine and Islamic that they did make copper coins, but not the Europeans. They always put some silver in out of an idea that the value of the coin was intimately linked to the precious metal in it. So here we have a Blanca of Seville, and it's pretty obvious. We have a castle and a lion for Castile and Leon, and a big S for Seville. Now, what's interesting about this all is the chronology. Remember, we know the chronology of the site. We know it certainly can't have been founded before 1492, but we know it was founded 1494. Now, what would we say the day before the end of the season, and it was like 6 years of excavation, if we hadn't yet found this coin, and this was a normal site that we didn't actually know the history of? Well, we'd say this was a site that was occupied in the 1450s to 1470s with, okay, we have one coin with a TPQ, terminus postquem, of 1483. So there was a little bit of occupation up to 1483, but most of it is in this period. And even once we do get the Ferdinand and Isabella, we can still say, yeah, it's a site whose major activity was 1475. That is 20 years before we know it could be. And this teaches us a few lessons about coins in archaeology. One, they tend to circulate a long time. And two, the absence of a coin is often more interesting than the presence of a coin. How do we explain this absence of all these coins of Ferdinand and Isabella? Well, this is one case actually where, again, it works backwards. The archaeology teaches the numismatics. There had been a debate of the sort in medieval numismatics, which means 4 people over 200 years wrote short articles about this, on when Ferdinand and Isabella introduced their Billion coin, their low denomination coin. There are 2 possibilities. There are 2 big times of legislation called pragmaticas. There's one when they merged the kingdoms personally in 1474. And then there's the big one when they merged the kingdoms officially to make a single kingdom, and that's in 1496. And some people thought they would have introduced the joint coinage in 1474 and some in 1496. Well, it's pretty clear from this that they did introduce the joint silver coinage, but it's absolutely certain, at least to me, that they did not produce the kind of low denomination coins that are regularly found on excavations before 1494, or we would have them at this site. And this again brings another observation that we will see repeated time and time again, and anyone who works with coins from excavations understands that on an excavation site, you rarely find pretty coins. You rarely find gold and silver coins. You generally find only the lowest denomination of coinage that was available. And that's because of the nature of what you're looking at. You are looking at things that were lost and not picked up. Obviously, if you lose a gold coin, you're going to spend a lot of time and effort searching for it. And if you don't pick it up, someone else will, because it's gold, it shines, and people may even know that there was one lost in this part. Whereas a copper coin, sort of same color as the soil, not really worth going back to pick up. So in a typical excavation, 99% at least of the coins that are found are copper. And of course, that has a big connection with the kinds of inference you should be able to make from it, but not everyone does. And that's one of the things I want to talk about tonight. So I'm going to leave the New World and get back to Harvard. I got involved with the coinage from Antioch basically when the Harvard Art Museum curator Amy Brower came to Princeton while she was researching this mosaic. It may not look terribly prepossessing, but that's what curators do, is they study everything even if it isn't worth display. I don't think this is on display now. But it's a mosaic with two figures seated on a couch, but that's about all you can tell. But from an art historical point, it's important and worth studying and worth trying to figure out when it was made and in what context it was made. And that's why Amy Brower came to Princeton, because we excavated the coins as part of the Princeton-led excavations of the 1930s, and we have 24,000 coins in the vault in my office from that excavation. In the 1930s, you took stuff home. We also took home all the records and archives of the excavation. Also, all the ceramics, not all the ceramics, at least all the important ceramics, most of the minor finds, and we sent home lots of mosaics and lots of sculpture, which were divided up among various museums, and that was how we financed the expedition. Because even in the 1930s, Princeton couldn't afford to fund an expedition like this. We had 250 Egyptians brought in to dig because people thought Syrians couldn't really dig. You needed Egyptian diggers, and the Depression had just happened. So as the excavation went on, we more or less auctioned off what we were finding to get more museums to sponsor. And by the end, we had 9 sponsors, including separately the Harvard University Art Museum and Dunbarton Oaks, who were sort of vying with each other to get the loot from Antioch. Anyway, this is what Harvard ended up with. In a minute, you'll see what Dunbarton Oaks ended up with. Okay, a little bit of a view of Antioch in 1933 when we started excavating. As you can see, and as the classicists who planned the excavation apparently couldn't figure out in advance, it's on a floodplain. And this influenced a lot of what they found and didn't find. Just in general terms, Antioch is all the way over on the east end of the Mediterranean. It was then in the French protectorate of Syria. It's now part of Turkey. And it is on the shortest route from the Mediterranean to the Tigris and Euphrates basin, therefore of enormous geographical importance throughout antiquity. The excavators wanted to see the old city of Antioch described in classical texts, considered one of the 4 major cities of late antiquity, and the only one that wasn't overlaid by a modern metropolis. So it was open for digging, as it were, and our excavation in the 1930s is the only time it's ever been seriously excavated. But this is what they found. After the ancient and medieval period, when there were levees which kept the place from flooding, it silted over every year from floods to the extent that here you have 30 feet between the ancient site and the modern ground level. Considering even the technology today, you wouldn't know what you were going to hit when you got down 30 feet. Certainly in the 1930s you couldn't. So it was really a shot in the dark based on classical texts which weren't always terribly accurate. As the time went on and we were finding less and less where we were looking, we learned that there were riches to be had to satisfy our patron museums back in the States in the suburbs of Daphne, up on the hill. And that's where this mosaic was found. Here we see in situ the house it was found. The mosaic comes from here. You can see the hole here is a well there, I guess, and the tree here. It's hard to see when you turn the slide sideways, but you can see that the Harvard mosaic came from here, and in the next room was the green carpet mosaic, which is now at Dumbarton Oaks. If you've ever been at Dumbarton Oaks and you walked from the Byzantine exhibit to the pre-Columbian exhibit, you have walked on this mosaic because they have it unprotected as just a walkway in a hall. According to the excavation reports, underneath the green carpet, they found another mosaic called the geometric mosaic, location now unknown, which probably means they covered it up when they were finished. And the interesting thing about it, for the purposes of dating this villa, this house, is what's called a sealed deposit. This is under the geometric mosaic. This is under the between the geometric mosaic and the green carpet mosaic. So the question is, can we date at least the replacement of the geometric mosaic with the green carpet mosaic? First, can we date the installation of the geometric with the sealed deposit underneath, and then can we figure out when it happened? So when you look at these coins, you see the latest coin, the terminus post quem, indicates a date for the geometric mosaic 392 and thereafter, and suggests that it was on the ground until about 450, and then they came in and did the nicer, more elaborate mosaic, green carpet. This is what the 24,000 coins at Princeton look like, each one in an envelope that tells exactly where it was found. This is a coin of Licinius found in the sealed deposit under the green carpet. Here's the coin. It's not bad for an excavation coin. I know some of you collect coins and you wouldn't pay $20 for a Licinius that looks like this. But, you know, for an excavation coin, it's not bad. When you consider what the 10th coin of the sealed deposit, the unidentified one, looks like. And that's why it's unidentified. We can see them side by side. Well, in order to do the job right, we had to identify this. Luckily, I had a pretty sharp-eyed student assistant who was able to recognize in this coin the monogram on the reverse of Zeno. We're not going to go through that now. So we then get the sealed deposit, adding almost 100 years to the deposition underneath the geometric. In other words, the geometric carpet could not have been laid down at 400. It could only have been laid down after 476. And that changes the whole chronology of the villa. Basically, what we now think is that rather than someone just getting bored with a dull mosaic and putting a somewhat more ornate one, that this change is probably to be connected with one of the big earthquakes that hit Antioch and the suburban Daphne, probably the one of 526. Okay, so now let's take a minute to look at what was all the coins, all 24,000 coins found at Antioch, published in the 1950s by Dorothy Wage and George Miles. Miles for the Islamic, Wage for everything else. And we can see here the blue is the outline of the coins found in Antioch that were minted in Antioch, and the red is the outline of all the coins found in Antioch. And we see some interesting things here. We see that there's no coins minted in Antioch from 650 to 1050 or so, but numismatists already knew that the Muslims who ruled that part of Syria for that period did not mint in Antioch. They minted in other places like Aleppo and Damascus, but not in Antioch. But the actual number of coins from that period is rather high. There's this enormous thing for the Constantinian period, And there's this rather strange drop in the period from 100 BC to about 200 AD. Now we know that Antioch was one of the centers of the empire, if not the eastern capital of the empire for this period. And I always ask my students, how do you explain it? And finally they come up with the idea, well, we're only looking at the copper coins. Maybe they used silver coins in those days, and only copper coins in the Constantinian period, which is true. There were no silver coins in the Constantinian period. Also, maybe they had banks, and they didn't need to carry around all their money in the form of coins. And they had credit, and they had rather advanced economic structures, which meant that you didn't have the kind of coin use that you find in actually somewhat less monetized periods. So that's a good warning. We also started mapping the coin finds. The classical sources tell us that the earliest part of the city was on an island here. But the sources are Libanius in the 4th century and Malalis in the 6th. So they're way later than this 3rd century BC thing, and it looks like there wasn't much activity in that part of the city in the Hellenistic period, even in the late independent early Roman period. See some in the Julio-Claudian, but it's really not until the Constantinian period that you get a lot of coins in that area that the classical writers tell us was the capital region. And then as we go, we see it fade out. The important thing we see, however, is that this north-south sort of road, which has been documented to this is the modern road, but it follows the ancient road. This is actually the modern, that is Ottoman city, that this transverse road was always the main focus of the settlement of the site, at least as far as the coin finds tell us, all the way through the Crusader period in the 11th and 12th centuries. Okay, so now I'm going to take off my classical hat and put on my medieval hat, and from now on we're going to talk about the Middle Ages. Mapping the coin, all the coins from Antioch in the period 500 to 1500, we see still in the 6th century the end of this boom, and then up and down and up and down and up and down, but a sort of diminution over time. How do we explain that? Well, here we have it again marked out in half centuries. And we look at the earthquakes, and we see there are a lot. And the biggest of the big is 526, followed by an aftershock in 528. We can make the case that the fall off in the coinage does follow this real burst of earthquakes in the course of the 6th century. When we look at the invasions, the big invasions are the Sasanian invasion of 610, the Byzantine conquest, which isn't so big, and the Arab invasion. So actually, it looks like the fall off was before the invasions, and things picked up not that long after the invasions, if we look at it that way. Now, for the past 7-8 years, we've been doing what we call a pilot project, going back through all the records of the excavation and all the artifacts that are in Princeton and looking at artifacts in other museums. And we focused on one sector, 1700, in the heart of town, right near this main road, to see what's happening there. Because what happens in the villas, like where the green carpet was, way out in the suburbs over here somewhere, isn't necessarily what's happening in the city itself. People abandon villas in various periods. The question is, did they abandon the sector? So here we is the original mapping of the coins of sector 17O, all the way from the beginning to the end, isolating for the medieval and redating the Islamic coins. Stefan Heidemann of Hamburg has been working with us on this to redate the Islamic coins. These were dated by George Miles, the greatest American Islamic numismatist, but this was at the very beginning of his career, and this was 60 years ago, and there's been a lot happening in Islamic numismatics since then. And so with Heidemann redating the coins, we have a little gap here, which has to do with the late Abbasid period reuse of early coins or imitation of them. He's going to come back and look again to see how many of these coins he can see as early 10th century copies, imitations, aftercasts. But basically, when you look at it all together, you see a fair amount of continuity from the late Roman Byzantine period into the Islamic period in this one urban site, without including all the suburban villas, which we spent so much time excavating to get at their mosaics. So we've been going through the handwritten excavation notes, the object lists, the object cards, the old photographs of the site. This is level 1 from the top. That is the latest level, which is clearly a pottery manufacturer. These are kilns here. And right now we're going to look on one level, level 2, which is under the latest level, but after the classical period. And this is what it looks like in one of the original plans. When you look at the profile, it's this level here. And I have to give credit where credit is due. I did an undergraduate seminar on the archaeology of Antioch, and we focused on this part of the site, and what you will see is actually the work of a couple undergraduate students who reconstructed the center of level 3 as a courtyard with a shop, with shops and storerooms and a street entrance with a portico, which one of the students called a souk, because it looks pretty much like the late Roman form of a shop, a small shop, and the early Islamic. Here we see it in one of the old photos, turned around. This is the street, so you would go through this portico, meet with the shopkeeper here, probably he had a table here, and then if you were serious, he would take you back into the courtyard to show you wares and the like. When we look at this shop complex, we see a fairly coherent amount of coin finds. We see some very early coin finds. Everybody has always said you can't trust Antioch because there is no stratigraphy because there were earthquakes. Well, there were earthquakes, but there is stratigraphy. Basically, what you've got here is you've got a city block that was occupied continuously from 300 BC to at least 1500 AD. That's 1800 years of people rebuilding one city block over and over and over. And it's clear that in the process of rebuilding this level, they dug up some old coins that somehow got into the mix. Also, some later coins may have percolated down from level 1. When we look at the coins found just in this shop, we see 8 of them, 18 are from the early Byzantine period, from Constantinople, also minted in Antioch, and from Nicomedia. And 21 are from the early Islamic period, from a whole bunch of mints throughout the Umayyad and Abbasid world. In other words, it's very clear that this shop was used continuously from the late Roman period through the Islamic period with really no break. There's no invasion horizon, as we would say. This shop just kept getting used. And when they stopped using Byzantine coins and started using Islamic coins, that's what they used. Okay, we're now going to look pretty quickly at a few other sites. We see Antioch here, which becomes Islamic and continues on. So we know what continued occupation looks like and continued coin use looks like from Antioch, a place which changed rule. And we're going to look at Alcott in northern Anatolia and Polis on Cyprus, both not coincidentally sites that have been investigated by Princeton, and for which I have been working as a numismatist. Okay, Alcott was undertaken by our professor of Byzantine history, John Halden, to see what a sort of frontier settlement would be like. And it is known basically as the site of an early medieval martyrdom, shrine, and pilgrimage site. And then, as things get a little tricky in that part of the world, as an army post. So basically, according to the few documents that there are, we would expect it to be most active in the Central Middle Ages, say the 7th through 11th centuries. Not many coins. This is not actually an excavation, it's a site survey. But 21 coins isn't bad, especially when it's pretty clear the profile. You've got the late antique coins, and then you've got a lot of sort of central medieval starting around 950, but you got nothing from 700 to 950. How to explain it? This is the period when we thought the site was most active. Well, we start looking around and looking at other excavations. And for the next few distributions you'll be seeing, I'm using only sites that have been excavated from the top to the bottom, that is, from the late medieval period all the way down through at least the classic period. If they didn't go down to the Hittites, I don't care. And that have published all of their excavation coin finds. And those of you who work in numismatics will understand how rare it is to get a site, even a famous site, that's actually gotten around to publishing all their coins. So we compare 4 coins in central Anatolia with Alcott. And so we've got here Alcott at the bottom, which is familiar. And we look at these other sites. Well, they don't have the total gap from 700 to 950 that Alcott has, but there's certainly, you see the same pattern. Lots in the sort of early Byzantine period, lots in the period from 950 to 1050, but not a lot in between. Okay, now let's go to Cyprus, where Princeton has just completed an excavation at Polis Chrysochous, which has lots of classical stuff and lots of medieval stuff, clearly dating as late as 1500. Now, the interesting thing about Cyprus is we don't know what happened to Cyprus in the period from about 700 to 1000. We know in 700 it was Byzantine. In about 1100, it's Byzantine again and gets sold to Richard the Lionheart. In between is the period that historians call the condominium, which means We don't know who was in charge, either the Byzantines or the Muslims or some combination of them. Well, let's see what the coins tell us. There are plenty of Byzantine coins of the type that those of you who like this sort of thing will be pleased to see. We have all these overstrikes. And the soil's pretty bad here, so this is about as good as the coins get. It's very alkaline, so they do tend to get damaged. We have one Islamic coin, which is legible, except that it doesn't have the name of the city, and it doesn't have the year, unfortunately. Many coins do. Many Islamic coins do have even the year. But this is fairly clearly datable to the period after the coin reform of Abd al-Malik, therefore 697, till the and it's clearly Umayyad, not Abbasid, so we can date it fairly well, and it's probably minted in Syria. We have one coin from this middle period between 750 and 1000. Here it is, in beautiful condition. You never get a coin from a site like this. You begin to worry when you get it, but we found it in context, so no need to worry. Then we get an anonymous phallus, these big, chunky things from the 11th century, which are surprisingly common on most sites. We only had one in Polis. As you'll see in other sites, they're fairly common. And then we get a fair number of deniers of the Lusignan kings of Cyprus from the late Middle Ages. So now when we map out Polis, what do we get? Well, we get pretty much what we got at Alcott. Big group of coins here, and then this long period with that's a single coin, that's a single coin, and then we get a few late medieval. And again, just to contextualize, we're going to look at other sites on Cyprus. And what do we get? We get pretty much the same period. We get, again, this long period with almost no coin finds. Just to contextualize more, we're going to look at sites on the southern coast of Asia Minor. And by now, you shouldn't be too surprised. We get more or less the same profile, lots of late Byzantine, and a little bit of an uptick in the 10th and 11th centuries. Looking at the west coast of Asia Minor, the Aegean, where there are famous sites like Sardis, Ephesus, Troy, Pergamon, some of which we know a lot about in the Middle Ages. Again, we see this big drop in the period from 700 to about 900. Moving west, and west for the Byzantine world is Greece, with a little bit of Italy. Probably not surprising to us now, we see the same lack. And we know that Athens and Corinth were active Byzantine centers in this Middle Byzantine period. One last place to look, Constantinople. Unfortunately, there are only 2 excavations in Constantinople that have published their coins, again, all the way through, Sarahane and Kalenderhane. What do we find in Constantinople? Well, we don't find the absence of coins from 700 to 900. If anything, this is pretty strong compared to the late medieval. It's not compared to the early, but there's activity here. We wouldn't be surprised if this was typical of the Byzantine Empire, but it's not. It's only the capital city, Constantinople, which shows this profile. So how do we interpret this? Well, to some extent, we, the numismatists, have to take the back seat and just hand this data to the historians and say, you interpret this. But we can suggest a couple factors. Demographic. There's demographic. The usual explanation is decline of population, that all of these sites were abandoned from 700 to 1000 through a great demographic catastrophe. Actually, in the West, I tend to believe that that is true for the 5th century, but not the East for the 8th and 9th. It's hard to see so much of the Byzantine Empire depopulated. Shift of population. Some people say, well, you're only looking at the classical sites, which are down on the river valleys. Everybody moved uphill to fortresses. Okay. Economic. General economic variation. This was a period, this 700 to 900, of economic downturn. Shifts in economic function. Now, many Byzantinists will say, well, this is the period of feudalization, when money takes a back role and returns in kind, military service, other things take their place, and people simply aren't using money. Fiscal. Well, in order to find copper coins, you need to make copper coins. And it's highly possible, and we won't know until dye studies are done, something every numismatist thinks needs to be done, but nobody wants to do, especially with copper coins. Until that's done, we won't really be able to know if there were fewer coins minted in the 9th century than the 7th. We can look at auction prices and get a feel that, yeah, these things are rare, but we don't like to go too far in that direction because there are other factors there. Change in distribution of denominations. Maybe they're only making those big coins that are harder to lose. Monetary. If you have silver coins, as we saw with the classic Roman period, maybe you don't lose them. So maybe it's a period where we're shifting from copper coinage to silver or gold. Availability of credit. Demonetization of denominations. If the state no longer accepts copper coins, that has an effect on what gets found. Now, generally, you tend to find the coins that people throw away because they say, can't use these to pay the taxes this year. And inflation. There are also some archaeological factors to take into account. Preferential excavation of certain periods. That is, do our archaeologists shovel off the top layers to get at the good stuff, which by definition is classical. But that wouldn't explain really why you do get the later stuff and not the middle stuff. Preferential saving and recording of coins. And I'll tell you, there are an awful lot of sites that publish the classic coins and don't publish the medieval coins. So you saw only ones that publish the medieval coins. And finally, I'm afraid to say numismatic, preferential study and publication of coins, and lack of identification of those awful little coins like that one we found under the green carpet. However, actually, when you look at those charts, they're fairly well represented compared to some of these later ones, which are a lot easier to read. Well, I leave you with these questions, and again, leave it to the historians in the room, of which I consider myself one on other days, to try to come up with an explanation for all of this. And as always with archaeological talks, we end up with sunset over the excavation. In this case, Polis. Thank you.
So we have time for a discussion and a question. I want to thank you very much.
Okay,
and that was,
my pleasure.
if I may say, that was a wonderful overview of the different sites and what you can get out of it. And it also shows the importance of studying coins in context.
And publishing what you find.
Publishing them. Because most of the numismatic work of the beginning of the 20th century and focused on beautiful coins, the large silver or gold without provenance, and then the results are very different. And it shows the importance of studying little chromic coins and publishing even if they are unidentified.
Yeah.
I did the same for Samothrace. I have just a detail. As you know, I'm interested in Cyprus. Do we know what the mint was, whether there was one mint or more than 1 mint in Cyprus?
That's
Because
a
in ancient times they
that's a
are
controversial question. Those of you who know medieval numismatists will not be surprised to hear that Michael Metcalf has a theory that nobody else agrees with, that there were 2 mints, one in Famagusta and one in Nicosia. Everyone else thinks there was only 1 mint in Nicosia in the Lusignan period.
Yes. Because in the Byzantine period, too, there was only 1 mint, wasn't
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Yeah. Whereas in ancient time, there were 10 different kingdoms.
Yeah, oh yeah. In ancient times, Cyprus was a real hub of numismatics.
So, other questions? Somebody is going around with a mic. Yeah.
Okay, so why don't we turn this mic off? I've still got mine on.
Just say, as you know very well, Antioch was reconquered by the Byzantines. And so that surely has to be factored into the change in production in the late 10th and early 11th centuries, because the Seljuk conquest was around 1050.
Right.
Is the point at which Antioch becomes Muslim again. So what needs to be factored into that is what happened in Antioch under Byzantine reoccupation. Another thing, one of your slides showed Al-Muhammadiyya with an arrow pointing into the sign for Kufa.
Okay, apologies. We're going to go back the slow way.
Yeah.
There we go. All right.
There it is. There it is.
I will
right down on the bottom.
I will
right.
sit down with my map and.
Yeah, Al-Muhammadiyya is actually Ray or Ragis.
Okay.
Right up on the Caspian. So
okay.
It's fascinating that a coin from the southern Caspian region makes it to this site. And the third thing I'll say to you privately afterwards. Thank you very much.
All right. In regard to the reconquest, yeah, we actually see a lot of the anonymous follies in Antioch, a huge number. In fact, one of my students is giving a talk in Kalamazoo later this week on the anonymous follies finds from Antioch. We find like 50 Seljuk coins of a type that's never been published. Lutz Illich has lectured on them, and we have his lecture notes. But it seems to be a very minor issue done in Antioch by the Seljuks that's never really been published. They're very thin and square with little elephants.
Of course, the decay of the patriarchate in Antioch shows us very clearly that the city was shrinking and losing importance.
Yeah. But again, in the Crusader period, and then of course, Antioch is a major mint in the Crusader period. So it does carry on.
Okay, thank you.
Referring to the New World excavations, and specifically the excavation of Harvard Yard, in the Harvard Square Red Line subway, there's a photograph of a copper Charles I farthing, which one of the historical plaques, which was found in Harvard Yard, and I just painted a pine tree shilling, which was the coinage used by the New England Puritans from the 1650s to the 1690s, and also it later became a coin. It became a symbol for the Sons of Liberty. I painted this at the soon-to-be-opened Colonial Trading Company and a Museum of Money on Bromfield Street in downtown Boston.
Okay.
And I only heard, and I've asked several numismatists, whether a bent version of that coin or that coin with a hole was used as a symbol for the Sons of Liberty and could potentially be found in Harvard Yard, since those were barracks during the winter of 1776.
Possibly.
Have you heard anything?
Those coins tend to be bent because it looks like some of them were made on a roller press. It's rather strange technology, not strange for 17th century, but strange for them to have brought to Massachusetts that early. But many of the pine tree shillings I've seen are a bit bent, a bit concave.
Have you heard anything about them being a symbol for the Sons of Liberty and
Not
to
really.
wear around their neck? Because certain coins, like I have with me several coins that have
Okay.
like
All right.
holes,
Very
like
good.
the Polish coin, which had a hole, which would have been, worn in the.
Mm-hmm.
It was minted during the Napoleonic puppet state of the Duchy of Warsaw with the symbol of Poland and Saxony, and which subsequently became part of the Russian Empire. It would have been worn like perhaps in the future.
I
the
look
Duke
forward
of
to seeing what
Saxony.
you found on that.
Well, no. Sometimes, like since it had a hole in it, it could have been an amulet. Another one
Yeah.
had 1794 with King Stanislaus, who was the final king, sort of former discarded lover of Catherine the Great, and he sided with the Russians to sign away. Essentially, gave up. But somebody had scratched out his face.
Oh, okay.
So that
But
sometimes
it happens with Roman coins too.
does it sometimes particular emperors.
memory, occasionally.
And with medieval coins, there's sometimes is there like a deformation that sometimes indicates?
I can't
individuals?
recall ever seeing that on a medieval coin.
But what about on a Roman coin? Like, would a deformation indicate a person's political opinion about?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's after Domitian, I think, and Caligula, both
Yes,
of them.
Caligula, and,
You
when
occasionally
already-
see
no, even,
bronze coins with the
yeah.
image chiseled off.
And Nero and
Yeah.
How about Theodosius the First?
maybe we should.
Yeah,
don't
we
have
can
much
continue
time. We
this
can continue the
afterwards.
conversation later.
I'm from Worcester, Massachusetts, and as you know, Francis Henry Taylor, who was a PhD from Princeton, got roped into joining into the Antioch excavations, and I don't know of any other place other than Princeton got any of the coins. Was Princeton the only
Yeah, we were.
city interested in that?
We got sort of the bulk of the stuff that had no artistic value, that couldn't be shown. Actually, Worcester got the nicest, as you know, of the mosaics because they were among our most fruitful sources of funding in the early years.
They had money.
They had money, yeah. But no, we have all the coins as far as I know. We have almost all the ceramics, all the glass, and certainly all the archives. We don't have all the mosaics, and we're doing a survey of all the mosaics that are out there. We know there's one in Honolulu. They're all over the place, and a lot at the Louvre because they were partners with us. And the sculpture, again, has been dispersed, but
Was that an update to the pamphlet that I remember getting at Princeton when I visited the museum, which I was shocked. I said, I've been here before when I saw the mosaics, because they're very similar to the ones in Worcester.
well,
And there was a pamphlet that showed the distribution.
yeah, we don't do pamphlets anymore. We do online databases. And we're working on one in collaboration with all the owning museums ultimately to bring back together, say, the green carpet with the two figures on a couch in the next room, at least online, if not physically.
Other questions? He's part of the coin club.
Hi, I was intrigued by your discussion of the shop in 17, that sector 17 that your course.
Yeah.
Center. You mentioned the coinage from late Roman to the Islamic, Byzantine Islamic. They sort of continued. You gave a sense of a continuity in at least the amount of coinage in that shop area.
Yeah.
Was there a sense that the function of that area continued from the late Roman as well in terms of the
No, actually,
or the material?
in
find?
the late Roman, there's a destruction layer in part of it. It looks like volcanic, or at least earthquake. Underneath that, there is a nymphaeum, that is the corner of a Roman outdoor fountain with a plaza. And then you get a destruction, and then above it you get the buildings with the shops, and then above them you get the buildings with the kilns. So it seems to go from public use to commercial use to manufacturing use, all in this tiny little square block, but over 1,300 years. And very interesting, at the very bottom, and we didn't excavate the Hellenistic layers. We knew they were there, but they were so faint, there was nothing to be seen other than a little changes in the color of the dirt. And also, it got very wet when you got that low. But in dredging that, we found a Neo-Babylonian tablet, a cuneiform tablet, which we're publishing. We're doing a whole monograph on 1700. And we're publishing that. It's, I think, 8th century BC. Sort of normal little laundry list type of clay tablet. So it's nothing monumental that would have been on display. It tends to make us think that this area goes back to Babylonian times. Now, Antioch itself went back and forth from Persian to Hittite to Egyptian rule throughout the Bronze Age and early Iron Age. But no one's found anything Babylonian there before. We found it in the 1930s, and we don't know where it is. It's probably at the museum in Antakya, but we have the photos of it and the documentation of it. It was found, and like everything, this excavation ended in 1939 in a panic. Not only was World War II breaking out, but that part of the French protectorate of Syria was actually traded to Turkey, a backroom agreement between Ataturk and the French that Ataturk would not side with Hitler in exchange for getting that chunk of the protectorate. So we lost our excavation right. We shipped everything first to Beirut and then put it all on a boat and sent it back to Princeton. So no one's actually looked at this stuff for 70 years. So it's a new excavation.
Sounds like it. I just want to make a brief plug on us. You're supportive of a publication of site coinage volumes, and the Sardis excavation here at the Harvard Art Museums. We're printing this month. It should come out by the end of May, hopefully early June.
Yeah, we talked
Coinage
about that.
of
I'm looking
Sardis.
forward to it.
I just wanted to comment on a couple of Harvard mosaics. One is the famous Pool of Thetis that was brought from Dumbarton Oaks and is now installed in a pool in the atrium of Morgan Hall. And the other one I wanted to ask
We had a talk, we sponsored a session on Antioch at the American Schools of Oriental Studies, and your people came and showed us the process of renovation. It was
Good.
fascinating.
The other piece I wanted to ask about is, in the old fog, there was a large concrete-backed mosaic with birds that was supposed to come from the Falit village. I wonder where that is now.
I'm sorry, you wonder where the mosaic is now or the village?
No, the mosaic. The mosaic.
Well, if you don't know where it is, I certainly
Well,
don't.
I don't. Okay, thank you.
Again, we hope to track down these traveling mosaics. We know that there was this, not only did we make a distribution in the 1930s and early 40s of the loot, but that in subsequent years, things were traded around among institutions. And we do have to sort of keep track of it.
I think we have to, in the interest of time, we have to put an end to the conversation.
Okay, there seems to be one
more.
one
Okay.
more there.
Just
Last
to
question.
clarify all the musical chairs that were played with mosaics, David, the Falit village mosaic is safely in our storage. We're waiting for sponsors to help us conserve them so we can put them on view. But there were actually two nice mosaics that Harvard could not put on view, and that I think were traded back to Princeton. But yeah, I encourage everybody in the audience, if you have the opportunity during business hours, so to speak, to visit the Harvard Business School and see this fabulous mosaic in Morgan Hall, which is installed beautifully. You can actually see it from different levels. It comes from a bath building and shows the deity surrounded by fish.
Thank you. So I think we want to thank our speaker again. And before you go, we have a little present for you in memory of Leo Mildenberg.
Oh, very nice.
Since you are Thomas Brunner had, when Leo had his 70th birthday, his friend had this medal made for him. So it has a portrait of Leo, which is actually a very nice. Have you seen it before?
No, I haven't.
Oh, and you don't have it because you are also very good. And so on the obverse, it has a beautiful portrait of Leo, and on the other side, it has a reproduction of 3 coins of Bar Kokhba, because Leo wrote the definitive book on the Second Jewish Revolt and the coinage of Bar Kokhba.
Okay, I will have a little bit of a crise de conscience, trying to figure out whether to keep this in my personal collection or give it to Princeton. But
maybe we can donate one.
That's the solution.
We have more.
Thank you.
And then we also have some of his offprints that again Thomas Brunner.
Oh, okay.
Gave us, and they are
Thank you very much.
So. And I want to remind you that the 3rd floor ancient galleries are open until 8, so please go up. And we don't have any medieval coins on view, but there are other coins and other antiquity. So thank you all for coming.